All right. So it's nice to be here. It's good that we can teach a little bit of online as well. It's hard to quite often find Dhamma in our local circles. So it's amazing that we have these things these days. We can get teachings online. And I remember when I started 2003, it was maybe. I was living in New York at that time, and there was just a lot of free distribution books available. Nothing. There was no online teachings like this. It was just sort of like this. You had to dig really deep to find the Dhamma, and then you tried to find the teachings. I remember going into different groups. Like I said, I lived in New York, and I was going to these different groups, and it was like you always get these free distribution little booklets, and they're just horrendously bad. The printing quality was really bad, and the translations that these people, sometimes they were like directly translated from Thai, for example, and it was just like you try to read it, and it was like, it's like, I don't understand this. I'm trying to read this, but it's just something weird about this. And later I realized it was just the translations were really bad. But these days it's so easy. If anything, everything in these days is in excess online. But it's at least it's good that we can do something, some of these things online. And same for us, our Finnish team here that. We don't have Finnish teachings. I'm sure for you in Norway and Sweden, and you don't have we all speak good English. That's why we're here. But then it's still nice to hear the Dhamma in your own language. It is actually even surprising for me. I've lived now 20 odd years in English speaking countries. First in the United States, now in Australia for 16 years, and I'm translating suttas into Finnish, and I still find it, like just yesterday I was talking with the Polish people, and I was teaching the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. And why I was teaching is just because I translated just into Finnish recently. And some of the words, I'm looking the Pali, and I've been hearing these translations for 20 odd years now. And I was just looking, there's this one word, for example, we have this word analaya. And you know, I hear the translation over years from Ajahn Brahm, Ajahn Brahmali, and other teachings. And it's like, okay, I sort of get it. But then I looked at that word, what could it be in Finnish? And it has this kind of, it just resonated very differently to me because it's your mother tongue. And, you know, when you hear something in your mother tongue, it's just this, you can see it in your eyes. And especially with the word like Analaya, because it's related to the word Himalaya. Hima means snow. Alaya means somewhere where the snow is resting. So it's like the resting place for snow. That's why Himalayas, they're the white-capped peaks, right? The mountains. And then, so Analaya is something where it doesn't have a resting place. It's the opposite of that, where the snow rests. So it's like you can just sort of like, it sort of evoked this idea for me. It was like, okay, it's snowing, but the snow doesn't have anywhere to rest. It doesn't have a resting place. It's like you can imagine that the snow is coming from the sky and it falls, but it has nowhere to fall to. That's what it's just the Buddha used this like really beautiful language in the sense that it was language of the people, and for them it resonated in a certain way. And these days we try to read it. Most of us, we read things in English, and maybe reading some of these things in Pali. But quite often it doesn't have this kind of it doesn't evoke that kind of like in your mind's eye, that kind of like understanding. What could it mean? But then, that's why I like to translate things into Finnish, even though it's perhaps not needed since most people read these suttas in English. But I just do it for myself because I find it so fascinating that you look at these words and all of a sudden it's just like, oh, that's what it means. And it's like, if for you, so you can sort of get this idea that it's, sometimes we forget the language of the Buddha used 2,500 years ago. It was the language of the people. It was, everybody understood what he was saying. When he used word like Dhamma, Nibbana, Sankhara, and these days, or whatever we use quite often, we use these words like vinaya, the Buddha, whatever, these words we use, quite often we leave them untranslated in English, or even for me in Finnish. But these were just words which were used in everyday language. So even for us, like, okay, the word Nibbana, like, it sounds all very esoteric. What does it mean? It could be a word, people find all kind of philosophical meanings to it, to, the word Nibbana, Nirvana. And sure, it has that thing. It has that really deep aspect. But it evoked in very sort of like very easy way of this kind of like, it's just, like when you hear your mother tongue, you don't have to think about it. It's straight away, it's sort of, you click, you understand. Nibbana means turning off. It just means that time they didn't have lights, so they had candles, or a flame goes off. The flame goes off, something turns off. The fuel has burned. You have the Buddha asked if there's a flame burning in front of you, and it's burning because of let's say it's grass fire or a wood fire, and it burns off, it's burning because of that fuel, whatever the fuel is keeping it alive. But then when it turns off, it turned off. It nibbanat, it turned off. And so there is this kind of like, all of these words, the fuel was burning in front of you. It nibbanat, it went off. And then the Buddha asked in these kind of instances, like, where do you think that the flame went? And, the obvious answer is like, the flame didn't go anywhere. It's just burned because of it depended on the fuel it was burning on. It was burning because of the logs you make a campfire, you go hiking somewhere, and you make a log fire, and the fuel is burning because of the logs are burning. And so it depends on those logs. And when it burns off, it goes to it nibbanas, it turns off. And the flame itself doesn't go anywhere. And that's so we forget that there's, I think, or we make them too difficult sometimes, these kind of concepts, and too philosophical, whereas they are just, there were a lot of people who weren't that educated, or they didn't philosophize too much. They just took the language as it is. It was an everyday language. So I like always personally to try to understand these concepts in a very, very sort of basic level. And then it makes sense. It's sort of, you would bring the Buddha's teachings sort of like closer to us. And we make the Buddha's teachings more accessible to everybody, instead of it's become this age-old question whether Buddhism is philosophy or is a religion. It's neither. It's you cannot put like, oh, we in this camp or that camp. It's not a philosophy, because philosophy is sort of like just word plays almost, or it's sort of like a mathematics of words. It's sort of it doesn't, quite often it's lacking that kind of lived experience. And it's not a religion in the other hand, because it's not just faith-based things. It has to be a lived thing. You cannot just say, oh, look, I'm a Buddhist because I like the teachings. It's almost not that we tell anybody that whether you're Buddhist or not, that you have to live and be Buddhist this way or that way, but you Buddhism is sort of it's a lived experience. You take the Buddha's teachings, you apply them into your world, and then they start affecting the way you behave in the world. So it's not it's a lived experience in a sense that the faith comes from that you see why things are moving, changing, why when things are having an effect on your practice, whether it's meditation or your everyday life. And so I think it's nice to approach Buddhism in a sense that it becomes sort of this kind of very lived experience where we feel it. We know that it has an effect. We know why it has effect. So it's nice to study Dhamma, the Buddha's teachings. It's nice to, but you have to combine it with the practice. And practice in Buddhism is meditation. Really is a key part we have to do as whether if you want to really go deeper in the Buddhist practice, because then you start seeing how your mind works. But we also have to take this thing to, like I said, it has to be a lived experience. So the Buddha we have this word vinaya or vineti. And vinaya you could translate as rules. And quite often if we use the word vinaya, it refers to the monastic rules, like the monks and the rules of monks and nuns. But vineti, if you look at that word vineti, it means to train. It's like you train a dog. You tell your dog, sit down. You give it a little piece of sausage when it sits down, and it gets used to sitting every time you hear it, like sit, and then it's like sits because he waits for the sausage, and then it's the same thing. Those days they use it for like training other animals, so like training horses. That is actually the same word, vineti. You train an animal. So the Buddha was always talking about we have the Dhamma and the vinaya, and he didn't just say it's like, oh, you have the teaching and the monastic rules. No, in that sense, he was referring to like training what we need to do for ourselves, and it's a training in. It's not just like most of you probably know the 5 precepts, that you take a precepts. They're sort of like a moral rules, but it's more about training in this kind of allowing things to fade away, just allowing them to vanish, not hold on to anything in the world. Train in kindness. I was just an hour ago. I was just sitting in my hut in the forest there, and I was just flicking through Bhikkhu Bodhi's. He's got a lot of nice books about the compilations of the suttas, the teachings. And one of the suttas there was like he had taken in that little booklet. He was referring that the Buddha said is like if you train yourself, you should train in a metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha, and so in this kind of 4 Brahma Viharas, the four ways of this kind of elevating your mind. So if you train yourself, you should train yourself in loving kindness, compassion, these kind of higher qualities of the mind. And I like saying like I said yesterday, I was teaching the Polish people, and I was saying that the first and the foremost of loving kindness training should be towards ourselves. We should really look inside of ourselves and understand that we are the first one where we should train towards. We should train loving kindness is ourselves first, because we live with ourselves all the time. It's they were saying, the Polish people, that they do, it's being a very Catholic country, they do this kind of Christian things where it's little bit of similar thing. This kind of they have prayer groups that he called them, or this person said, and then they sort of do prayers for others, and they were saying like, okay, this is like loving kindness practice, and is there anything wrong about that? And I said, of course, there's nothing wrong about doing that kind of loving kindness practice, but it's interesting that it's very easy always to have compassion to others. It's very easy to think that it was like, oh, I should have loving kindness towards others. And we forget the key person, which is ourselves. And that's why we need somebody to remind that, we should practice kindness, compassion towards ourselves. And we need to have this practice of mindfulness, like awareness, that where we actually look inside of ourselves and realize that maybe I haven't had that much enough compassion towards myself. Maybe I haven't had enough kindness towards myself. And once we sort of like start to have that practice, the life becomes easier. And the Buddha's path is a path of kindness, letting go, of happiness. And, obviously we always talk about the Four Noble Truths, and the first Noble Truth is like, everything is suffering. Okay, well, great. Everything is suffering. Yes. But the nice thing is that is the path which leads away from suffering. So the Buddha gave the Eightfold Path, right? And that path actually leads us away from the suffering. Obviously, the ultimate happiness, if there is ultimate happiness, that is the Nibbana of ending of all things. But until then, when we're walking on this path, we should see nice signs, road signs, so to speak, that I'm becoming more at ease with myself. Even if you don't have enough compassion for yourself yet, or metta, loving kindness, you are sort of slowly going towards that. You slowly start understanding it's like, I'm all right. I'm okay. There's nothing so unworthy of myself that I cannot take care of myself. So always remember that these kind of practices like loving kindness, that don't just, you learned it from somewhere. All of us, we have, beautiful grandmothers and grandfathers and mom and dad and other people who have taken care of us, even teachers. And we have these people who we have learned the compassion, we have learned what it means to be taken care of. When somebody took care of us, when we were in need of that, then we know what it feels like, and then we know what it feels like when you give it to somebody else, how they would feel. And at the same time, we know when somebody have abused us, how rotten it is, how bad we feel about when somebody speaks badly, somebody abuses us. We know how bad it feels. So then we restrain ourselves. And these are all this part of that vinaya training. We train ourselves to be with body, with speech, and even with mind. We're trying to train ourselves not to be violent, abusive, all of those things. And it's not just sort of like we're born with these skills. We can actually practice these things. So don't get ever sort of thinking that I'm like this and I cannot change, or this is just who I am. All of those things they're not really valid. As long as you start practicing something, it becomes like a habit. One of my teachers told once, I thought it was quite nicely said, he said that if you don't have money in the bank, when you give, what you're giving is, you cannot give, you go into debt, right? If you don't have money in the bank, you're going into debt when you keep giving. But if you have money in the bank, then you can give. The same way, if you have a loving kindness money in your bank account, well, then you can give, right? It starts actually coming out of you because you have been practicing loving kindness in your own mind towards yourself, and slowly just sort of build this thing. And then that bank account, you have that money in the bank account, and then it starts flowing out of you very naturally. Compassion, you have compassion towards yourself. I'm okay. Well, then that kind of acceptance very naturally flows towards others. A lot easier because you've been training on it. The same things, there's other, we call these kind of spiritual qualities, the Buddha always praise things like, well, I just talked about kindness and compassion, but also generosity. Generosity is one of those things that some people just, they were raised up certain way, for example, at a certain time. They feel very cheap. They don't never want to give. They're not very generous. Generosity doesn't always mean just giving money. It means this kind of like even attitude of generosity. And it's, again, don't think it's your fault. It's partly how you were raised, how where you grew up, how your mom and dad used, were they generous? Did they have those qualities? So we're all conditioned beings. So your conditioning might be that you don't have that yet. But when you start training in generosity, then you contemplate on it, which is, again, it's a nice, beautiful thing, which is maybe not done enough. Most teachers always say, meditate. We do meditation, we study suttas. But how often we teach about contemplation. Contemplation is actually a practice, what the Buddha was teaching often. And to make something like generosity in a proper thing that it works, we need to contemplate it. The contemplation that I'm using these fancy Pali words because I know them, so it looks like I'm very smart because I'm using them. So anusati is the Pali word for contemplation. So, and the jaga is the generosity. What do we use for word for generosity? So jaganusati means contemplating, reflecting on your generosity. So you do something nice, and then you reflect on it. You make more of it. And so take, whether it's compassion, whether it's loving kindness, whether it's generosity, all these kind of spiritual qualities, take it as part of your training and reflect on it. Guaranteed, you won't become a more big-headed person. You will become a kinder person because you do it. You keep tapping yourself in the shoulders, and you start believing, it's like, I'm a generous person. I did that. I'm a good person. And it's like, take it in. And if you do something, again, somebody says, oh, thank you for doing that. Thank you for helping. Don't just say, oh, it's okay. It doesn't matter. So it's like, yeah, okay, yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's good. And take it in, make it more. It's people actually like when you when you say they thank you, it's like, oh, thank you for helping me. And they said, oh, you're welcome. I really enjoyed it as well. And, make more of it. And the same thing is and use it for others. Keep complimenting others, and you to take care of others. And all of these things, these qualities, like I said, they don't just come from us. They're not bestowed from the heavens. No, this is vineti. It's training. So train in these things. Make sure that it becomes a habit. And then we have things called what we call supporting factors. So meditation is one of these supporting factors. Meditation takes it deeper because it's like positive loop back. It's like a feedback mechanism. So you do something, and then you sit down, You meditate, you stay in quietness for a while instead of always just on your phone or watching a computer. You look what's happening inside of yourself, and then you start seeing that, oh, this is the karma. This is what you get back from doing these things. And then you learn from it, and it's naturally starts affecting your life. So the cool thing about meditation, mindfulness practice, whatever you call them, is that you don't really have to do much. It's just you just take your time, you sit there, and you know that because of this, that happened. It's very natural. Now we have the Vassa period, the rains retreat period in our tradition. So in 3 months we don't do much. I'm actually not even teaching that much, which is a blessing for me, and I can deepen my own practice. I've been monk now for this is my 15th rains retreat. So, and you do 3 months off for 15 years, and it means that a few years I've now stayed by myself in little hut in the forest and been able to just be there quietly. And I can see over the years how difficult even now it is to let things go, which I've done in the past. The karma of bad behavior follows for a long time. So I've been thinking about, not that I was really a bully, I was never really a bully, but like being a boy, you had those kind of things where you got into fights, and there was like unkind things you'd done in the past. I remember going ice fishing at some point, and I was like really abusing the fish instead of just like killing the fish and then just getting it over and done with. I was like, I've just got angry with the fish, got wrong kind of fish, got caught in the hook, and I was just ripped it out, that hook out of the fish. So it's really quite abusive, and then it's like all of those things, they just keep coming back to me. So that kind of it shows how you cannot escape certain kind of karma. It's very natural that you restrain from that, because you start looking that of like, you look what's in your mind, how the mind behaves towards your past actions, and then you restrain naturally. So that's part of, again, going back to the vinaya, that's the training. But the training is a very nice, natural process. Like, coming from a family where we have, we used to go hunting, or, part of the moose hunting season was in autumn. And then I was in the military, so I grew up with guns and all that. I remember, and then it's like I just got into a habit of shooting things. And I remember going into my last time I'd shot somebody. There was a bird, again, annoying birds. We have these birds which they don't have very beautiful sound. And I was just like, it was a springtime, and they had just hatched, and there was one hopping on our backyard at mom and dad's place. And I took the gun, and I was like really like stalking it, and then I shoot it, and I was like, I just saw it like jumped up, and then it stopped, and I was just like, I hope it's just pretending. Maybe it didn't die. Then I go to the bird, and I was like, oh, it died. So it's just like very naturally you have this kind of compassion. And I don't understand why some people, how can they be hunters? Do they get used to it, or they just, I don't know why. But for me, it was like very naturally, that was the last time I ever shot anything. I literally like stopped shooting anything, even target practice. I just put away the gun, and it was like, that was it. It's like, it is interesting that some of us, we have that kind of karma already from the past, that we naturally go towards that kind of restrainment. And some people don't seem to have it. Like, they naturally are just hunters. I know so many people coming from northern Finland and countryside, and I know so many of my friends and and all the people in the village, like they're very naturally there's like hunting and fishing and all those things, and there was never like any qualms about it. But for me, it didn't feel natural. But it was like, but again, I was like that conditioning coming from that, not bad place, from the growing up there, that conditioning sort of grew up on me, and I became like the same way, so that similar kind of person. But then once I got into the Buddhist practice, and even though I went back to live there a little bit in my village, I naturally moved away from that kind of things. So there is something in my, and now I'm a monk, so I guess there's I have some kind of background, but so take these practices and then sort of like you see them that this is part of the practice we have to do. We all have to go through this. It's just we going in, this training takes time, and you're leaning towards one direction, and that leaning just takes time. But it's not a faith-based practice in that sense. It is just a practice of just almost just having enough, sometimes just having enough just to be able to be there with yourself is good enough. People always complain how difficult it is to have loving kindness. I don't feel the metta. Again, it's part of it's like you just don't practice enough, but sometimes it is true that it doesn't work. So the only thing you have to do is just sort of sit there, and it's almost like you endure your past karma. And the interesting thing, one of those things I said we have the metta, mudita, karuna, and upekkha. Those are 4 Brahma Viharas. Again, it looks like I know things because I'm saying things in Pali. But the last one of those Brahma Viharas is upekkha. And upekkha quite often is translated as equanimity. But again, it's like equanimity. What does it feel like? What kind of feeling is equanimity? All of this, always remember, all of these things, they're actually proper feelings, like metta, loving kindness, mudita. I like mudita because that's my name. Mudita is sort of like compassionate joy. You see somebody else happy, and you're happy yourself because you're like, oh, they're succeeding, and oh, that's nice. And then we have karuna, compassion. Upekkha is an interesting feeling because if you just translate it as a equanimity, it doesn't feel like anything. It feels like almost like I don't want to say, maybe I shouldn't say it, but sometimes I do use this simile. It's like a lot of people who do Buddhist practice, they have just too much of equanimity. They become this kind of dead person. It's like you don't have any kind of feelings. Oh, I'm a meditator. I'm a serious person. No, be careful with that. It's like, no, have feelings, have beautiful feelings. And the same with equanimity. It's actually a beautiful feeling. And the equanimity is a feeling of that upekkha, equanimity. It's almost like it's more like a contentment type of feeling. Like I said, sometimes you just have to endure things, but that's not really equanimity either. Like upekkha. Upekkha is like that feeling of contentment. When my teacher Ajahn Brahm made up this beautiful simile of upekkha, is that it's that last day of school when you're coming from school and it's May, early June, and the school has ended. You're 6 or 7 years old, and you just have your little backpack and you're walking away from school. Remember that feeling when the school has ended. Tomorrow there's no school. Unfortunately, now the school has started again, I've heard. So those poor little children, they get abused in the school again. But remember that feeling when it was a spring and, like the summer starting, and how there's a long summer ahead of you. All the work is done. You don't no more homework tomorrow. remember that feeling of that contentment. That is that kind of equanimity we're after. That's just sort of freeing feeling. And the Buddha used that word towards your own kamma, your own, how do we, kamma is that, like, well, all of these things. When you sit down and you look what's happening in your mind, you're looking actually your kamma. This is how I behave. This is what you look. And so you are at ease with what you look at. That's what you're like referring to when you have equanimity. Equanimity is not this kind of like, I don't have any kind of feeling. I'm like, yeah, I'm getting somewhere. No, you're not getting anywhere. You're just becoming a dull person. So we're not after dullness here. Just keep that in mind. Have beautiful, positive feelings. That's what we actually are trying to cultivate. Like I said, generosity, loving kindness. These are really, really nice feelings, right? And remember, like, the Buddha always praised this kind of like where you just have this able to let go. So finally, I think I'm spoken way too many words again, but now we're getting into the point of we're going to meditate soon. But so we're going to meditate for a while, and then you start looking in your own mind like, okay, this is my kamma. This is how I behave in the world, and this is now I have to sort of endure in my mind. Hopefully you don't have to endure too much. Hopefully you have a lot of nice feelings. But if you don't, if you have this kind of like, I don't really like the look, my mind, like how my mind looks, well then that is the past conditioning, past kamma, all these things. How do we cultivate easiness towards that? How can you be okay with it? And then hopefully you don't have to dwell too much on that, because it becomes this kind of endless fight of you're almost like fighting against yourself. And like it's a losing game. You cannot win yourself. You cannot outwit yourself. It doesn't work that way. So hopefully you have this kind of just like you can be at ease and then cultivate instead of looking, holding on to that idea of this is who I am, this is how my mind is. You cultivate softness. And that softness, cultivating softness should be, first of all, just in the beginning, I hope not so much in the beginning, but towards your body. You relax the body, you cultivate softness. And secondly, when you start, then you can just cultivate softness towards your breath. And then the breath stays with you. And always remember, this kind of cultivation of breath can happen anywhere. Even if you're in the doctor's office waiting for the doctor to call you, even if you're in a cafeteria at workplace and you've finished your food, you can just sit there and cultivate softness towards your breath. It's always with you. And again, it becomes like a habit. I'm ever grateful for my teacher, Ajahn Brahm, who's taught me all of these like things over the years. And I've been able to be with him. And I was just literally just somewhere a few days ago with him, and we were just sitting there waiting for something. And I said, he gave a talk last Wednesday about this topic, about softness of the breath, or this kind of like the practice is having this continuous practice. And I was just sitting with there. So he gave the talk on Wednesday. On Thursday afternoon, I went out with him. I was sitting there waiting. We were waiting for something. And I said, that was a brilliant talk, Ajahn. It's like cultivating that softness of the breath. And he said, isn't it just? He said, I'm doing it right now. We were sitting there waiting, and he was just sitting there. And his habit is just to be there instead of ruminating, oh, I need to do this next, and this is going to happen. He was just cultivating softness of the breath. And I was like, that's a really good practice. It's a really good practice to have it with you everywhere. Quite often we overthink about life, overcomplicate things. Why can't we just cultivate soft breath? And that's what we should be doing now. Okay, let's meditate for a while. Let's see if you can do that. So I will now stop the recording for a second, and then I put it on again, because otherwise this might not work. So give me a second.